Here are some of the assassination at 1. Brigadier Pierino Okoya, 1970. Brigadier Pierino Okoya was a young army officer who rose through the ranks to become deputy army commanders in the first government of President Milton Obote. At the time of his assassination, he was also the commander of the 2nd Infantry Brigade based in Masaka. He traveled to Gulu on a personal errand on January 23, 1970. It was a tense period between December 1969 to 1967. Obote had survived an assassination which was said to be engineered by then Army Commander Idi Amin, who was Okoya's boss. In the heavily tribalized army, Okoya actually was seen as a bitter rival to Amin and likely to succeed him. Amidst all this, on the evening of January 25th, Okoya made a brief visit to the Air Force officers based in Gulu, where he had conversations with the base commander, Captain Smart, who was very close to Amin. A few hours later, Okoya was shot dead with his wife at their home in Gulu, a few kilometers away from the army barracks. Following the killing, 2 inquiries were instituted, one by the army and one by police. Both probes heavily implicated Amin, but Captain Smart and other officers were jailed over the assassination in Luzera prison. His murder remains unresolved, but is believed to have marked a crucial juncture in post-independence Uganda. As his boss, the then army commander Major General Idi Amin is said to have plotted it as the forerunner for his coup against Obote a year later in 1971. Amin released the 2 officers and promoted them, whereas those behind the inquiries that implicated him were killed. 2. Chief Justice Benedicto Kiwanuka, 1972, was Uganda's first Prime Minister of Uganda, March 1st to April 30th, 1962. He was 40 years old at the time. Near elections were held in April 1962, and the Uganda People's Congress UPC party of Milton Obote allied with the Kabaga Yaka party of Baganda, loyalist to Kabaga Edward Mutesa II, to defeat Kiwanuka's Democratic Party. The contest has sometimes been described as a tussle between Catholic represented by Kiwanuka and DP and Protestant represented by Obote and Baganda and favored by the British. When Obote was shot in an assassination attempt in 1969, as mentioned prior, Kiwanuka was suspected to have organized it and Obote imprisoned him in 1969. 2 years later, in 1971, then Army Commander Major General Idi Amin toppled Obote in a military coup. He immediately freed Kiwanuka from Luzera prison and appointed him Chief Justice on June 27, 1971. Soon after, however, Kiwanuka became known as a critic of Amin's disregards of the rule of law and brutality. His ambitions and fearlessness made him a target in then President Idi Amin's reign of terror, and on September 21, 1972, he was picked in his office at the High Court chambers in Kampala by state agents. He was reportedly shot dead by Amin at State Lodge, Nakasero. His remains have never been found. His murder resulted into the international condemnation of Amin's regime and led to more fear and anarchy locally, as several critical people were killed and many others fled into exile. Among the many honors of the former Chief Justice is a street in Kampala named after him, Ben Kiwanuka. 3. Erinayo Wilson Orima and Charles Obote Fumbi, 1977. In February 1977, Uganda was shaken by the deaths of 2 prominent government officials, Erinayo Wilson Orima and Charles Obote Fumbi. For Erinayo Wilson Orima, following his tenure in the police force, he served as Minister of Land, Mineral and Water Resources 1971 to 1974, and later as Minister of Land, Housing and Physical Planning 1974-1977 under President Idi Amin's regime. Charles Obote Fumbi, on the other hand, held the significant positions of Minister of Internal Affairs in Idi Amin's government. His role placed him at the heart of the nation, internal security and administrative affairs during a tumultuous period in Uganda's history. By early 1977, discontent with Amin's regime was growing, both domestically and internationally. Accusation of human rights abuses, arbitrary arrests, and unexplained disappearance were rampant. In response, Amin's regime intensified its crackdown on perceived dissent. On February 16, 1977, Orima and Fumbi were arrested under allegations of involvement in a coup attempt against Amin's government. The duo was publicly accused of treason, with the regime claiming they were collaborating with exiled former leaders to overthrow the government. The government announced that on February 17, 1977, while being transported for further interrogation, the vehicle carrying Orima, Fumbi and Luwum was involved in a collision. The official narrative claimed that the accident occurred as the detainees attempted to overpower their drivers in an escape bid, leading to the fatal crash. Contrary to the official account, reports and witness testimonies indicated that the 3 men were taken to an army barracks where they were interrogated, beaten, and subsequently shot dead. Henry Chamber, Kiwanuka, the Minister of Health at the time, later revealed in his book A State of Blood that the bodies were riddled with bullets. Specifically, Archbishop Luwum had been shot through the mouth and chest, while Orima and Fumbi had multiple guns wounds, with Orima also sustaining a bullet wound to the leg. For Janani Luwum, 1977. It is 1977. Janani Luwum is the Archbishop of the Metropolitan Province of Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and Boga in Zaire. He was killed in Kampala on February 16 or 17, 1977. Luwum, who was very highly respected internationally, was very critical of Amin's disregard of rule of law, brutality, and murderous streak. In January 1977, he boldly delivered a note of protest to Amin. Days earlier, soldiers had raided and searched his home for alleged caches of arms. Amin reacted by arresting him, together with two other officials, Orima and Fumbi, the Inspector General of Police and the Minister of Defense, respectively, on February 16, 1977. Amin paraded them before journalists and accused them of treason and said they were agents of former President Milton Obote, who, after being hosted by Amin in 1971, was using Tanzania as a base to launch military operation to remove Amin. They were then driven off by state agents to an unknown destination. The next day it was announced that they had died in a motor vehicle's accident as they were allegedly escaping from State Lodge Nakasero, where they had been detained. People who buried them said their bodies bore bullet wounds. The general view is that they were already dead when they were placed at a scene arranged to look like an accident. Schools and streets are named after him 48 years later, saying Janani Luwum Road. Major General David Oyite-Ojok, 1983. Oyite-Ojok was the chief of staff of the Uganda National Liberation Army, UNLA, in the second regime of then-President Milton Obote and effectively the linchpin of the army. On the morning December 3, 1983, he prepared to fly to the jungles of Luero to overseas fighting to flush out then rebel commander Yoweri Museveni forces of the National Resistance Army NRA guerrillas. Oyite-Ojok set off from Nile Mansion, now Kampala Serena Hotel, with 5 other army officers in a Belt August 412 helicopter. Colonel Alfred Otoa was the officer flying the helicopter. Shortly, the chopper crashed in Luero, not far from rebel territory, killing all on board. The incident dramatically changed the fortunes of Museveni guerrilla war and later today eventual collapse of the Obote's government as the inter-tribal conflict between the Langi and Acholi weakened it. It resulted in a coup against Obote, a Langi by the Acholi army generals. The incident also set off a slew of conspiracies on what could have transpired, from faulty mechanics to a plot by the Vice President Paulo Muwanga or Obote to eliminate Oyite-Ojok. The three were mired in power struggles. President Museveni visited the scene of the crash in September 2007. Andrew Lutakome Kayiira, 1987. On the night of March 6, 1987, Kayiira, former leader of the Uganda Freedom Movement, a rebel group, was having dinner with Henry Gombia, who worked for BBC at the time, and the latter's wife and their 3 children when the house was attacked by gunmen. In the ensuing melee, Gombia fled the house while his wife and children hid in the bedroom. It is alleged that the gunmen busted Kayiira from one of the rooms and shot him in the arms and left side of the body. Kayiira, like Museveni, had in the early 1980s led an army of guerrillas to fight then-President Milton Obote's government, while in the bush Kayiira and Museveni had on and off alliance and generally disagreed on tactics. Kayiira, who was an ethnic Muganda, often felt he had to be a rightful leader of the armed rebellions against Obote, since the vanguard of the fighting was in Buganda. After Obote was ousted on July 27, 1985, several rebel forces, including that of Kayiira and Museveni, challenged the Tito Okello's government for supremacy in Kampala. When Museveni emerged winner in January 1986, Kayiira made peace and was even appointed Minister of Energy on January 3, 1986. He was arrested in October 1986, charged with treason and locked up in Luzira prison. On February 24, 1987, Kayiira was released from prison after the government withdrew the case against him. 10 days later, he was shot dead. The murder of Kayiira sparked several investigations, including one by Scotland Yard, a special British investigation unit at the request of President Museveni. The report by Scotland Yard has never been released. In January 2007, the Democratic Party, to which Kayiira was associated, released its version of the report, which implicated the government of Uganda. The government also released its version absolving it of any any wrongdoing. It almost turned into a circus as the various reports did their rounds, claiming to be the authentic report of the murder investigation in 2009. Responding to a request to Kayiira's friend Gambia, Scotland Yard officially declined to release the report, stating that releasing it could jeopardize diplomatic relations with Uganda. Gambia, however, is said to be convinced that the NRM government orchestrated the murder. 7. Professor Dan Mudola, 1993. Professor Dan Mudola was killed in a grenade attack in Wandegeya. He was killed together with Dr. Francis Chidubuka, who was a literature teacher at Makerere University, Kampala. Mudola, who was also a lecturer at the same university. Significantly, however, Mudola was at the time the vice chairman of the Constitutional Review Commission. All the fine details is the year 1988. Government of Uganda is making a new constitution through a commission collecting views from Uganda. The commission vice chairman, Professor Dan Mudola, will be murdered and the killer will run to a witch doctor for protection. This is the story. 8. Lieutenant Michael Shalita, 1997. Lieutenant Michael Shalita was a prominent officer in the Internal Security Organization (ISO). He was shot dead in Kamucha. It is believed he was killed because he was investigating cases of massive corruption involving top government officials. Nothing was ever confirmed. 9th is Brigadier Noble Mayombo, 2007. Brigadier Noble Mayombo told Hilt on April 27, 2007. 4 days later, on May 1, 2007, he was dead. He was only 42 years old. The death certificate issued by Aga Khan Hospital in Nairobi was never made public, but it is believed that Mayombo was suffering from complications due to acute pancreatitis. However, speculation still abounds that he was assassinated using poison. Mayombo's death is often cited whenever any leader fears for their life in Uganda. This is partly because he had come to epitomize loyalty to President Yoweri Museveni and the determination to do his work with unflinching resolve. This was on show when, in 2001, Mayombo oversaw the brutal arrest of his younger brother, Okwiri Raboni, at Entebbe Airport. Okwiri was a staunch supporter of Museveni's perennial opponent, Dr. Kizza Besigye. At the time, Mayombo was head of military intelligence. Later, he was appointed permanent secretary, Minister of Defense. 10th is Major General James Kazini, 2009. Kazini, a battle-hardened former army commander, was found dead down in a shanty house in Namuongo, Kampala, with a deep cut to his head on November 10, 2009. Immediately after, a woman named Lydia Draru turned herself in, confessing to have murdered Kazini. She was tried and convicted for his murder, but speculation remained rife on who the actual killers were. Many doubted how a young woman of average size like Draru could have physically subdued Kazini, who had fought many gun battles to the point of bludgeoning him to death. Kazini was disgruntled at the time he died. He had been undeployed since 2003 and was facing a possible conviction in the General Court Martial for abuse of office and insubordination. In short, he had fallen out with the security establishment. Speculation still abounds that he was bumped off by highly trained assassins. AIGP Andrew Felix Kaweesi, 2017. The former Assistant Inspector General of Police AIGP was shot dead in his car on March 17, 2017 as he left home in Kulambiro, Kampala at 9 a.m. His assassins were riding on motorbikes when they opened multiple rounds of fire on Kaweesi's car, killing his bodyguards and driver too. He had served as commandant of Kabalie, a police training school in Masindi. Commandants of Kampala Metropolitan Police and police spokesperson, his last posting. His killing so President Museveni make an unprecedented assertion that the police was full of criminals, which was a scathing indictment of then Inspector General Police General Kali Kayiira. It resulted into the start of Kayiira's troubles as his right-hand men were arrested one by one, including those belonging to a raw outfit called Boda Boda 2010, which was in bed with the police. It climaxed with the sacking and arrest of the former police chief in the following year on March 4th and June 13, 2018 respectively.